In the chapter we are studying, Sri Aurobindo describes the object of all spiritual seeking, especially from the perspective of the approach of knowledge. He starts by saying that all spiritual seeking moves towards an object of knowledge to which men ordinarily do not turn the eye of the mind, to someone or something eternal, infinite, absolute. And it aims at a state of knowledge by which we can touch, enter, and know by identity this eternal, infinite, and absolute. Through the chapter, he has described the variations of these approaches, including variations which are life rejecting, life accepting, and the true leader of the journey in our effort to this realization is not really the intellect, which can only be like a scout, but it is in fact the deeper inner will, capital W, the spiritual intent, aspiration that pushes forward the flame, Agni of the Veda. And yet this scout and pioneer, which is the intellect, serves a purpose because it is like a first entry point, a first point of contact through which we are able to enter in relation. And so as we read this text, there is a part of us which is this intellect, which acts as a scout and pioneer, which is in understanding making a first contact. But then there is a deeper part within us, which is that true knower, will, who follows in the wake or who uses this point of contact as a support through which it can push forward its deeper knowing. Seen from this perspective, the reading itself and the text is as much a deeper meditation as it is an intellectual understanding and even a means by which we train the mind to cross its own limits and open to something deeper and higher, which has the capacity to have this direct experience, which mind obviously fails beyond a point. In the portion we are now reading, Sri Aurobindo comes to a description of this absolute. And so when we approach this now, we have already been through it in a more rational way. And it is this kind of a meditating quest that we must now turn to draw the maximum of this passage before we move on with the rest. Here he says, if we can once cross beyond the mind's frontier twilight into the vast plane of supramental knowledge, these devices, the devices of the mind to uh, eliminate all things which come in the way of the direct experience, these devices can cease to be indispensable. Supermind is quite another, a positive and direct and living experience of the Supreme Infinite. And it is here that we move from an approach of negation to a direct positive experience. And then now he describes what the supermind sees. And we will pause as we go along and as if allow that to emerge within us from that deeper knowing. The method we use is one that instinctively we tend to use when we are studying something difficult. A simple text, a simple idea, reading a novel, for example, a storybook. We can read on, the mind constructs images, and we can pass on and at the end perhaps recall what was read. But when we reach something more difficult, where the mind struggles to understand texts of philosophy, texts of technical science, we find the first reading is not enough. We can sense the grammar structure and the structure of ideas, but the thing itself behind the ideas is not immediately grasped. And so we reread a second time and a third time instinctively. Sometimes the rereading leads to the emergence of the insight, the knowledge, and we say, oh, now I get it, and we move on. But often, when it does not, we set it aside. And then when we return to it, we find now it is clear. Sri Aurobindo explains this phenomenon by saying that during the time that we were struggling, especially because of the nature of the struggle, the attention of the inner knower, capital K, the true knower, was drawn to that thing which we are not able to understand. And then when we set it aside, it drew out its knowledge already present of that thing. And that knowledge emerging was what gave us the understanding when we reread it. Now, when you understand how this works, there are immediately several ways of applying this to our own deeper study. The first thing we notice is when we read something casual, when our attention is not struggling, the inner knower does not need to pay special attention or need to draw out and push forward its innate knowledge. So there needs to be a kind of a crisis, a difficulty, a struggle, which calls the attention of the inner knower for a special intervention. Now, this could be done in two ways. One is by the intensity of our quest. We take this text, having read it, having perhaps understood, but dissatisfied, we go over it again and again with this extra effort, and that draws the attention. Or a more mechanical approach, which is present in almost all traditions of the world, to repeat 3 times. It's interesting, you will see in all the old stories, mythological, symbolic, uh, fairy tales also, which often have a deeper spiritual or other symbolism. There are always 3 attempts. First time fails, second time fails, and then third somehow happens. Or the questioner is before somebody who has the answer, and the question has to be asked 3 times before the answer is given. And you wonder why. Because as children, when we hear those stories, we know, okay, it's going to happen in the third time. We just wait. But there's a deeper truth behind that, in fact, it is the third time that the attention of the inner knower is drawn. The first time, the surface mind casually turns to it, fails. The second time, you will notice, oh, what was that? I missed it. You watch. Now you pay more attention. The difference is, first time you were in a state of casual attention. The second time you make a conscious effort of attention. And then it's not working still. You go back a third time, and this time you know that your special attention also has failed and something extra is drawn. Now, if you catch the difference between these three levels of effort, you already get the hang of the secret. And the secret is to draw this extra intensity from deep within. It's as if a resource that is there within us, when mind fails, we turn to draw that something more. Observe carefully what you do on that third attempt. When it fails, it's not working, you center yourself. And then, as if turn in and draw something from within for that effort. If you observe this a few times and become familiar with this, which was always there in us instinctively, and then make it conscious and then deepen consciously that whole process, you'll find the capacity already exists in us to consciously turn attention of the inner being to this issue. Still, the way the inner knower, capital K, knows is different from the way the outer understander, I may use the word, understands. There's a reduction, there is a loss, there is a filtration, there is a dulling, a narrowing, flattening, etc. So ideally, one would want not only to draw the attention of the inner knower, but also to be able to receive as directly as possible what it knows with least loss. The condition for this is to make the outer surface knower, the understander, as silent as possible, turn it inwards or upwards, as the case may be, and then remain in a state of aspiring receptivity. So the two things here, you're aspiring, your attention turns to that which you wish to know, and you're in a receptive state, not actively pushing to know. The active attempt to know interferes already and clouds. It's like water surging to the moon, the waves jump up and down, and as a result, the surface is all disturbed. It has to be like a mirror reflecting, and yet the attention turned to seeking. In actual practice, even when we reach this point in our basic culturing of consciousness, and it's a skill one develops by sheer effort, persistent effort, there's still something which remains, which is like a restlessness. Why hasn't it come? Where's the knowledge? When is it going to come? A kind of an expectation that having got to the state, I would have got it. Why haven't I got it yet? Even that has to be taught to be quieted. One actually may put in the mind the idea that it may take 1,000,000 years, I will just wait. And then even remove that idea. So in that state of quiescence, aspiring, I would avoid the word expecting because that is itself an intervention, but still there's a turn of consciousness as if you know it's going to come, a state of faith, and then waiting. And into that, then, the emergence of the inner knower's knowledge can smoothly flow and settle. And then it's like, a revelation just emerging, and it's obvious. You see it, the knowledge is there. So one can actually train this, and one should. In normal practice, if one has not made the effort, as a result of the sadhana, because one works to quiet oneself, to open oneself, etc., these things tend to form. But if we are conscious of what it is and work on it consciously, it can be made perfect. That's the biggest advantage. So when we read in a meditative way with this intention, this will be our approach. So the first thing is the accessing that deeper knower, calling on him, on it, on that to put forward its innate knowledge and show the real knowledge. In the form of the integral yoga, we may make a more personal relationship, a more personal connection, turn inwards and visualize or conceive of the presence of the Divine Mother or Sri Aurobindo himself seated within, ask him to give us the knowledge, the deeper understanding, and so on. As we proceed in such an approach, there is also the other part, which is the capacity of our consciousness to rise up, to ascend, and to be able to receive in a more complete, a more comprehending grade of mind, where that knowledge can be held without reduction and known directly in identity. And that would be the ascent through even the gradations of the higher mind towards intuition and so on. But this is the method broadly which we can work upon in all our reading of Sri Aurobindo, especially in a passage like this, where he is describing something which can normally be fully known and appreciated only on that level. And yet he is giving us the point of support in the intellect through which the connection is made. So then he says, what's the perspective of this supermind looking at the supreme infinite? He says, the absolute is beyond personality and beyond impersonality, yet it is both the impersonal and the supreme person of all persons. One could take each of these and use as a theme for meditation over several days, as I had suggested the last time that we read the passage. But now we will allow a more intellectual articulation of this. Reading the next two sentences, the absolute is beyond the distinction of unity and multiplicity, and yet it is the one and the innumerable many in all the universes. It is beyond all limitation by quality, and yet it is not limited by qualityless void, but is too all infinite qualities. I mean, all these three, you will see three broad glimpses from different approaches. One looks at personality, impersonality. The other looks at unity and multiplicity. And the third approach looks at quality and non-quality, blankness. In all three, the common feature is this. It is not only this, but also its opposite, and yet it transcends both, but it includes both. So first he declares it is beyond both personality and impersonality. Yet it is both, including the impersonal and the person. This point is for the mind always knockout, because for the mind these are simply contradictions. On the other hand, when we'll become very quiet, we notice in the higher capacity of the mind's conception, when we say something is beyond these two, we turn to a sense of a transcendence. We do not have a picture anymore. That's where the mind becomes, the mind struggles. But if we just hold that pictureless sense of something, now we have something beyond personality and the opposite beyond impersonality. So it is neither personality nor impersonality. Both personality and impersonality to the mind have images, associations, forms. But this is now already outside the domain of forms. And we conceive of something which embraces both, and it includes personality and impersonality. We have now a conception, it is in the domain of mind like a rarefied idea. It's not yet a living experience. If we were to now approach the same thing from a deep state of identity, we put ourselves in a state of inward concentration and we look at the whole universe and observe the universe from a poise of detachment, impersonality. So everything is there. It's like one big sheet of a painting, a photograph, surrounding you in a 360-degree panorama. But it's all one sheet of paper. The colors may be bright or dull, the shapes may be large or small, but it's all one sheet of paper. And you hold this impersonality in your awareness. And then at the same time, you realize you are the person enjoying impersonally this whole sheet of the cinema, 360-degree cinema. And the attention turns on your own personality, which is complete, which relates to all these things impersonally, and yet it is a personality. And then from the poise of that personality, I'm aware, I'm enjoying. It can choose to focus in its enjoyment on each of the images, each of the forms, each of the colors, and give to it a special relationship. And recognize that each of these colors means something to you, has a special relationship because it corresponds to something within you which is now represented here. And you have the sense of many different facets of your one personality. And the whole panoramic image of the world around is as if a reflection, expression of this one person gazing upon all things impersonally and yet seeing its personality in all things in multiplicity. And then suddenly in this experience, you notice the impersonal and personal are not contradictions. They are just two ways of experiencing the same thing. They are not even two facets in opposition. It's one experience which I could articulate with this slant or with that slant, but it's always complete, whole. Why at all do you want to slant it as impersonal or personal? It simply is what it is. And then you do not need any words, personal or impersonal. There's no philosophic contradiction. There's only a very simple way of being, a simple experience. That's what he tells us at the end of this passage. The walls constructed by the measuring and separating intellect have disappeared, and the truth in its simplicity and beauty appears and reduces all to terms of its harmony and unity and light. And the nature of the experience where all these are held in simultaneity is always unity, awareness which knows, and harmony. So when we consider from this perspective the divine in the way he relates to the universe, it's obvious. The absolute is beyond personality and beyond impersonality, and yet it is both the impersonal and the supreme person and all persons. And we can have a glimpse, even an experiential glimpse. It's not that experience, but it's the closest that we can experience in consciousness to begin with. And this is a starting point as we turn in meditation to aspiring to the totality of this experience. It's like from this entry point we ascend until it becomes the full experience. Complete always, of course, in a supramental consciousness, but already accessible in an ascending consciousness. Now, the same way we take the next one, the absolute is beyond the distinction of unity and multiplicity, and yet it is the one and the innumerable many in all the universes. And we may just take this initial experience, look at that same panoramic image that is cast around us that we look at the universe. See it all as a single image, the single image formed of so many variations of that same single image. And then you notice already one does not feel a contradiction between unity and multiplicity in this way of seeing things. Observe oneself, and once observing consciousness, it is one consciousness that sees, and yet what it sees is all these variations. But it does not see them as so many different things. It's one seeing that includes all variations. And again, we find there's no real contradiction. There are just two different ways of articulation and not of experiencing, even. There is one experience only. And in all universes, you could conceive of layers of images, panoramic, circulating around in layers and layers beyond. And it's as if you can have an infinity of universes, and yet you are the one. The vision that sees and knows is one. It includes all the multiplicity in its oneness. And as a subjective experience, already one begins to feel how oneness and multiplicity, unity and multiplicity, are just so many ways of describing. And the third, it is beyond all limitations by quality, and yet it is not limited by quality less void, but is too all infinite qualities. So when we look at qualities, and everything can be reduced to qualities, we look at an image, a color, a sound, an experience, it's finally the quality of the experience that you're touching. But when you look at that quality in itself in separation, it is a limited quality. But when you see that quality as one modulation of an infinite surface, and again we use this image of a panoramic 360-degree representation of our world experience, center ourselves in a poise of detachment, seeing it all equally. You notice it is on the same surface that you have all these variations. It's as if the surface of the projection is putting up all these qualities. We can draw easily now on images that we have, symbols that we have with modern technology on an LCD screen. The screen is the same. The colors it puts out are coming from the same surface. Is it red? Is it green? Is it blue? It's the same thing which is putting out these different colors. They are only variations of one surface which contains within it the potential of all colors. It puts out some, withholds others, and so you get this variation. But if you see it as not so many pixels, but one surface modulating as waves, qualities throwing up as waves of colors, and then subsiding, you see how there is a continuity of one single whole, which is all quality. But when that subsides entirely, it is no quality, as if, or quality is put forward against something which is a baseline, which you call no quality, therefore. I mentioned last time how in our experiments with the senses, we find this happening very frequently. I mentioned the example of smell, and recently, that if you try to make a combination of all possible smells, take bottles of all kinds of essences, mix them all, what would be the smell like? And interestingly, what happens is this nose smells the complete combination of all smells as flat, no smell. It's a blank, against which something can stand out as a smell. Now let's say you are smelling now a perfume of the rose. And let's bring all possible flowers here. Every possible flower in full intensity. What would be the result? It would become flat again, as if no quality, no smell. You intensify some against the others, and again you will have the smell. So what we are seeing here, the sense of no quality, is nothing but a baseline that the perceiving consciousness creates, against which we see the variations of the ocean surface waves. But what is that baseline? That baseline itself is part of the variation, fluctuation of a still larger wave. And when seen in this way, the idea of quality or qualityless void is completely lost. There is only one which transcends quality and qualityless but modulates itself in these two facets of experience. So you look at the whole universe, and what you recognize is there is something behind, which is the absolute, transcending both quality and qualityless, modulating as these gigantic waves of Ananda, which through the five senses we perceive as this beautiful universe. But the thing itself, which is modulating all these waves of its own Ananda, we do not see. We see the effect that those waves of Ananda have on our senses, and by that we have the image of the universe. The reality is only one massive oceanic Ananda revealing itself, conceiving itself innumerably. Now, what happens in the ascent of consciousness, even the senses as they ascend, increasingly we see behind the phenomenal appearance. Right now, I see red, green, blue, and all these variations of colors, smells, tastes, etc. But we feel and sense behind those colors as the senses open to higher grades of consciousness. We see a living presence of which the perfume is an expression. It's like a blind man smells the flower but cannot know what the flower is like in its beauty of color. When his eyes open, he sees the beauty of the flower. When his hands reach out and touch, he feels the texture and softness and smoothness of the flower, delicacy. And as further dimensions of his perception open, it's as if he feels the living presence of a psychic glow, which translates into all these terms of sensory experience, but which is the real thing behind. And eventually, one looks at the whole universe and one gazes upon this living substance of Ananda, self existent, sheer existent truths. And how does one describe that? Because when one glimpses it, it is not through the biological sense, it is by the higher faculty of the sense of consciousness, which then reflects and infuses into the biological sense. And then one looks at the whole universe, and it is this incredibly beautiful substance of sheer reality, blissful, eternal, self existent. And so the Vedic Rishi, when he faces this reality, this appearance, articulation of itself, of the absolute, he can only say one word: oh, the wonderful, Adbhuta. So we have a ascent of our perception, but already the first point of contact is made when in some part of the consciousness we are able to sense these things. So he has described the absolute from these three broad facets. And now he turns to a series of images. So far there were no images, they were abstract ideas: personality, impersonality, unity, multiplicity, quality and void. They are abstract ideas. We saw how we could, in a way, access them still. But now he has images. It is the individual soul and all souls and more of them. So first we look at the mind's eye, or with the physical sight, a soul, a person, a being, shorn of body, mind, and then you have this idea of a pure soul. But not just one soul, it is all souls. And it's not just all souls and more of them. So the suggestion of infinite possibility of souls that are still to be as if cast out. So you have here an image of soul, an infinity of souls which are there in the universe, and still behind all the potential which is waiting to unfold. And in this vision, you have only as if this pouring out of souls. The next, which follows, it is the formless Brahman and the universe. Now, while the focus of the previous image was souls, individualized, now it moves to this massive non-individualized wholes. So formless Brahman and the universe, which is formed Brahman. So we find it easy when we look at the universe of form to conceive of Brahman as the totality of the universe, as the totality of all forms. And this is the reason why you'll find very popularly now people refer to the divine as the universe because it's accessible, it's a picture you have, you see form. But it's not yet complete unless you go beyond to the formless all. So here was individual, and now immediately after it is the all, but the all in two aspects, formless and formed. How do you conceive of this formless Brahman? Sri Aurobindo has the passage in his commentary on the Isha Upanishad, which he has also suggested as a passage for meditation. As the best theme, he says, for meditation is the Brahman, and that passage he points to as a starting point for such a meditation. And broadly, the way he describes it there, to conceive of the Brahman as all things that exist, include now all things which can exist but which don't in our current experience. And then extend this now not only from the present but to the past, all things which have existed and all things which could have existed but which did not express themselves. Extend now to the future, all things which will exist, which can exist, and which might not exist, include them all. Now, already you have to the mind, because we are still dealing with form, all possible forms, past, present, future, including forms which did manifest and which did not. You can conceive of the most atrocious 16-legged dragon with 3 heads and 12 tails of different colors. And it is, obviously, it has not been ever, but it can be, it could be in some universe. If you can conceive it, include it. You can't, of course, enumerate, but already your mind blanks out, it stands back. And yes, all things which could exist without needing to personally identify every possible form. The idea that all possibilities included there. But still, this is only one level. Now he takes it, then he says, now you have to extend it further. All this is still individuals and accumulation of individuals. We go to the whole, the totality of all this, past, present, future as universe, and infinity of possibilities of universes based on every possible law, every possible principle. And already the eyes widen and the mind is slightly stunned. And then transcending all these forms, standing beyond space and time. And we have this, in this way, the individual, the universal, and the transcendent poises of the Brahman. And the totality of all these poises, this is the Brahman and our way of conceiving, perceiving, visualizing the Brahman. And one can meditate on this theme of the all. So this is the way we would approach the formed universe and transcending beyond it the formlessness of in which this formed universe exists. And you see how it is a completely different approach. Here first we saw souls innumerably pouring out, and now we see totality, complete universe, and formless Brahman. And again, you could pause here, get into a deeper sense of consciousness, and see all these as complementary aspects. Catch an experience in yourself where these are not contradictory anymore. They are just two different ways of seeing one whole Adbhuta, the divine wonderful. And then he moves to the next step in the description. It is the cosmic and the supra-cosmic spirit, the supreme Lord, the supreme self, the supreme Purusha, the supreme Shakti. Now, in all these, we are entering in relation to what we may call conception of God. We always need to give that a kind of a personalized aspect to be able to relate to it. If God was a machine, we would find very difficult to relate to. If God is a void, we don't know where to turn to, how to reach out and communicate. So we need to create a certain image of personality. But when we do that, there are already two broad categories of relationship, cosmic and supra-cosmic spirit. So the divine as immanent in the universe, and you conceive of the divine here in everything, containing everything, carrying everything, and then take a step out, standing above everything. And you may say supracosmic, creator God, creation is different from creator. Or we say he holds his creation, himself pours himself into creation. And then the two statuses, supracosmic and cosmic, are not contradictory. They are simultaneously dual states. Like, and the natural image we have, a mother carrying a child in the womb. What is the child made of? Her own body. Where is she in relation to the child? She is in the child, she is the child, and yet she contains and carries the child all around. If now the birth takes place and the child separates from the body, it does not change the relationship in her consciousness. There is only a shift in whether the containment took place in the perimeter that we call the body or outside that perimeter. So, to the divine consciousness, which is supracosmic, there is no such artificial perimeter. All is in itself because there is no other. All sense of space time is within itself because there is no space time outside it. It is its own conception. So, everything that exists is within it, formed out of its own substance. Again, another image which comes traditionally presented is the spider and his web. There are many spiders which go through this process. Every evening, they will spin the web, and in a very perfect geometric form. Once the web is completed, they sit right in the center. Very symbolic. And then they wait. The prey is caught, they run, catch, come back to the center. And then at the end of the night, they will break down the web. Or in some cases, eat it up, reabsorb it, so to say. And you have the perfect image of the divine casting out the universe out of himself, made of his own body, unveiling this web of space time form, playing in it, hide and seek, catching, and then withdrawing, absorbing, reabsorbing into itself. So we have this simultaneous poise, cosmic, supracosmic spirit, and we can know the divine as both of these, including both. And then we have to give a special name to this status. When he is both supracosmic and cosmic, Lord, because he is the master of all things, presiding over them, everything is according to his will, but at the same time, he is in them, enjoying them as his possessions. He has lordship, possession, ownership, and enjoyment. You are not Lord if you are merely owner. Lordship includes the concept of possession and enjoyment, and the word is Isha in Sanskrit. And Sri Aurobindo highlights this aspect of possession and enjoyment. So, Lord, the Supreme Lord, there can be many gradations of statuses of Lordship, the Supreme, highest, absolute, always. And the Supreme Self. Here there's a shift again in the focus of the attention. He is Lord, stands above all, enjoys all things, but what is his relationship to himself? He is. self. What is he enjoying as he enjoys the whole universe and his transcendence of the universe? Himself. So now if you blur out all these variations of cosmic, supra-cosmic, it is only he in his relation to himself. He is self. So the supreme self. You see how you're sliding from one experience of the divine to another experience of the divine. There's a continuity. There, as if you take this diamond and you turn and highlight this facet or that facet. Nothing is lost of the other facets. It's just shifting emphasis of how you're looking at things. As he's enjoying himself, his enjoyment of self is universe, cosmic and supracosmic statuses. But it is his self, and we're just highlighting that relationship to himself. So, supreme self, as distinct from, again, there can be many gradations of self experience. Each one of us, as he discovers his deepest identity, will say, I am self. And yet, there is a status of self of which all these selves are facets and aspects. So, he uses carefully this term, the supreme self. And then, this supreme self, who is only enjoying himself, he also has this station where he stands back from all that he is, and even from all his enjoyment of self. Even one can say his enjoyment is a passive enjoyment as an observer, reflecting all the movement of his own play. And there is at this point the supreme Purusha and supreme Shakti duality status. The supreme self, as if has a dual poise, observing his enjoyment, immersed in his enjoyment and flow and play of his enjoyment. And so you have the supreme Purusha and the supreme Shakti. The Shakti, as she settles into the state of supporting, observing, and accepting, sanctioning her own play, becomes the Purusha. The Purusha, as he pours out his energy of the play of his enjoyment and manifestation, becomes the Shakti. There's no real division between the two. They are just, for our mind's perception, two different poises of a single experience, which is Supreme Self. So we have moved from Supreme Self to Supreme Purusha and Supreme Shakti as dual poises. And then we move again to another experience from there. The Supreme Purusha, it simply is. He never changes. He does not manifest himself. He simply is. The manifestation takes place. So there is the poise of the ever unborn. He simply is. And on the other side, there is this pouring out of the energy, which is the Shakti, which is in a continuous whirl of self-expression, manifestation, and you have the endlessly born. And these dual status of the consciousness are simultaneous, again aspects of each other. So you have the ever unborn, E cap, U cap, who is endlessly born, no capitals. So the ever unborn, because he is unborn, unchanging, unmanifest, standing back as the base on which the manifestation unfolds, but ever because even the sense of time does not exist, he simply is. And the movement of being born is what casts out space-time. The ever unborn who is endlessly born. But the two have to be held together as two facets for the completeness. And then the infinite who is innumerably finite. This poise ever unborn because he is beyond time, beyond space. How do you describe him? What is his size? What is his duration? Infinite, eternal. But even the idea or the phrasing of infinite and eternal is within the domain of space and time. You draw a line which is infinite, it is taking place inside space. What do you call that thing which is outside space-time and which contains space-time itself is not space or time? So we have to give a word. It is obviously bigger than infinite, but it is the real infinite, of which spatial infinite is a partial expression. So here we call it the capital I infinite, for lack of a better word. It is not spacelessness. It is not timelessness. It is a sense of completeness. It has the sense of space, and yet it is not space. So that's why we have to use capital I. So he uses this, the infinite, and this is the poise of the Purusha as he stands back. He's infinite because he's ever unborn. And on the other side, as the pouring out takes place, everything in the pouring out, being a whirl of the energy of the creative Shakti, is as if cast out into form in relation to all the rest, appearing as finite, appearing as limited. But if the infinite expresses itself in finites, and you have only 10 of the finites, automatically, the moment you conceive of 10 of the finites, between the 10 there are 9 more gaps into which you could fit in finites. Between them there are another so many, and so on. The idea of a limited finite automatically leads to an infinity of things to fill in. And so it is impossible to conceive of a few finites. There has to be an infinity of finites. The manifestation itself, cast out from the infinite, is an infinity of finite appearances. Although each of these finites you could separate and discover in it an infinity of finites. So Sri Aurobindo describes this in a chapter in the Life Divine. And he's describing this process at a conceptual level, but also its implications in the physical experience. He says, because the nature of mind, capital M, this is now cosmic creative mind, the nature of mind is to measure out and distinguish. It always tends to find gaps, finites within finites within finites infinitely, and then to aggregate finites, joining them, assembling them, combining them infinitely. So there are two movements, separating, dividing infinitely, and then assembling and accumulating infinitely. Until it goes on dividing infinitely, until it, as if it could, as if it would, if it could, reach to some ultimate substratum that could not be divided. Until as if, but it cannot. It cannot come to an end because that's the nature of the mind's consciousness. The moment you have divided, you have within that division further possibilities of division. Or it tries to as if extinguish itself into a blankness. And then he says it cannot do that. Because behind is the supporting knowledge of the supermind, which knows the whole. So you cannot as if continue to divide until you extinguish reality and come to a blankness. There will always be something because of the oneness which is behind. So you have this very interesting relationship. The infinite, who is innumerably finite, you can go on dividing the finite, but because there is the infinite behind it, it will never end. Implication for physical experience of reality is you can go on dividing particles unendingly. You will always find some smaller particles and smaller particles, the smaller structures of energy, unstable. And he says this again in the Life Divine, unstable perhaps, but always reconstituting themselves. And this is really the experience of the physicist. You can make bigger and bigger particle accelerators. You'll never come to an ultimate particle. So you find this again, this complementary poise, the infinite who is innumerably finite. And when you hold both together, then you have the totality of the one, the self. But you see how this emerged naturally from the previous description, the ever unborn who is endlessly born. The status of that ever unborn is infinite. The status of the endless birth is this infinite, innumerable finites. And then summarizing this, what is it finally? It is a oneness which has now manifested itself into multiplicity. So, the multitudinous one. And are we describing something different? No, we're just describing the same thing with a different emphasis of our articulation. The one multitudinous, the multiplicity in the oneness of the oneness, resolving itself always back to the oneness. But if you look at it now from a still higher poise, it's just one simple flow of flowing, multiplying, multiplying. It's as if one single principle repeating itself endlessly, creating this complex appearance. So the complex, simple, capital S for simple. You see, in science, we have this intuition. Instinctively, we seek for the ultimate theory of everything, which will be something very simple. One law which will simply explain all the complexity of the universe. Why do we have this idea? Because we sense that the truth behind is something oneness, which is so simple. But the difference from the previous image, the multitudinous one and the complex simple, is just this, the shift of emphasis. Simple as one which is in the Indian tradition, one of the names of Shiva is Bholenath, the simpleton. Because anyone who approaches him, asks for any boon, he just says yes and he grants it. Now that's the way it is popularly explained. But there's something more profound there, that the creative power that manifests is not going through a whole process of I'll do this and I'll do that, I'll put a law and I'll put a counter law and arrange it and make this whole complex mess. It just flows out the way the flower unfolds. Does it have to think? No, it just unfolds. It is what it unfolds. So it is this aspect which is highlighted, a pure spontaneity, effortless ease of unfoldment, which appears as this enormously complex universe. But the thing itself and the process of its unfoldment is just spontaneous, natural, effortlessly simple. The many-sided single, again a different aspect moving further, a single indivisible, always single in all its multiplicity, but there are only facets and sides of the one single. And as an image, one can take a point, a single point. How many directions does it have? Infinite, all possible directions, isn't it? Take a sphere to begin with. How many rays do you have emerging from it, from this sun of light? Infinite. Between any two rays, an infinity of rays, all possible directions. Now shrink the circle until the sphere until it becomes a single point. It is dimensionless point, but it contains all possible directions, including directions we cannot conceive of. It is as if an infinity of dimensions in a dimensionless point, and all possible rays implied in that single one. It is always this single. There is no two. It is single, and yet it is many-sided single. And this is the nature of the cosmos, of the divine, of the absolute. The many-sided single. And then what is this? We shift again the focus to the power of its casting out, of its self-expression, which becomes all these forms. The word, capital W, of the silence, capital S, ineffable. That point which became all these lines, infinite dimensions of lines, that point, if you had to articulate it, you cannot. If you had to describe it, you cannot. It is unchanging, undescribable, ineffable stillness. And yet the very fact that it exists creates, defines, manifests all these infinity of lines all around, all possible directions. Its sheer existence implies all these and reveals all these. You draw the point, automatically all this is there. So it's as if silence could speak, but it speaks only silence. And yet what it speaks casts out all this infinite possibility. The word of the silence, ineffable, indescribable. So this is a image, of course, moves now to something even more profound, that there is a power of casting out, but the power itself is not like a formed effort energy. It's not like I create energy. The fact that I am, the reality of all the multiplicity is there. You cannot separate the two. They are just simultaneous. One truth, one reality. The word of the silence, ineffable. In the way this takes us further in the articulation is this power, word is vibration. All possibility is vibrating, unfolding into vibration. And so you have a center, and then you have this manifestation vibrating. And this center is as if consciously radiating, manifesting himself. And so comes the next way of looking at it, the impersonal, omnipresent person, capital P. So the person is there. The fact that he is radiates, creates, but he is impersonal. He is not making an effort. He simply is, and all the rest becomes naturally, effortlessly. And yet he is in all that comes out. He is omnipresent. He is in all the lines which emerge from that point. And this person who casts out the whole universe without any effort, the name that we give in the traditional vocabulary is Krishna. Krishna, from the root krish, akarshana, attraction, drawing together into oneness, pulling back into oneness. But it is this oneness, one center, which radiates out all this, but which also is the reference point that draws it back into harmony, back into its unity, back into its essential truths. That is the highest station of the omnipresent personality, and yet he's impersonal because he didn't do anything to manifest all this. He just was, and the rest came to be impersonal, and yet it is his own expression because he is in all of them. So it is personality. So impersonal, omnipresent person. And at this point, your mind is boggled. Oh my God, Adbhuta, undescribable, unendingly wonderful. And so, one word, the mystery, a capital M again. And the nature of the mystery is, when you first look at it, you say, oh, this is what it is. And then you enter, but I have to figure out this part. As you enter, you discover, my God, this is not what I thought it was. There is so much more. And the nature of mystery, the definition of this term is this: the deeper you enter in it, the more you discover there is to know. So, like the crab on the seashore looks and sees this big wave and say, ah, I know the ocean, it is this big wave. But as the human walks and steps into this wave, he sees further waves beyond. As he rises to a greater height, he sees the ocean and the edge of the ocean in the horizon and says, see, that's the limit of the ocean. And then as he steps still higher, he sees the ocean curving around unendingly. And then as he enters into the waters of the ocean, he discovers unending depths. But this is the nature of our experience of the divine reality. The deeper we enter into it, the more the dimensions open. It's the experience we all have in our spiritual journey. We come to a point of transition where we say, ah, now I have got it. Just this one little gap missing. You cross that gap, and suddenly a whole thing opens up, and you say, my God, all that I knew was so superficial, and now there's so much more. But this time, at least, I've got to the real depth. And as you extend your experiences, and then there is something missing, something not quite fitting, you break through that, and then a huge, as if new dimension opens, and all that was there before is superficial, and as if unendingly. If this were not the case, if there was some point at which you could stop and say, now I have it, then the universe would be very mundane, very flat. It would finally boil down to some fundamental, very simple expression, and we could say, oh, I've got it. But because the divine is this unending mystery, always more complex, always more rich, always more complete, therefore this universe is unendingly evolving. Otherwise, evolution would stop eventually when it finished the potentiality of the divine. But the divine is not only unending in its potential, the potential itself is unending in its potentiality. It grows more complex with more surprises, more discoveries beyond our conception. However deep we have gone, there is something greater beyond our conception. And that's why it is the mystery. And in all this, just the step before, we saw the single point which was indescribable, ineffable, and so many rays emerging, not only in 3 dimensions, but in 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions, 6 dimensions. All of them are held in that dimensionless point as a potential. So, in this mystery, there is still this overarching oneness, which is the divine, the person, Krishna, to whom you approach, but who leads you unendingly into his delight and waves of infinite delight, of discovery. If this is the case, is the divine unknowable to his own experience? Can the divine say, oh, I don't know myself, my depths are so great? Or does he know himself? And this now becomes the natural next description of the divine. Translucent in highest consciousness to its own spirit, but to a lesser consciousness veiled in its own exceeding light and impenetrable forever. So, to a lesser consciousness, when you look at the divine, you see this huge oceanic light. The light is so intense, so bright, that you do not know what is beyond that which is now revealing. So, the light which reveals itself conceals now further ranges of light, veiled in its own exceeding light. And how far can you go? Because the deeper you go, the brighter the light becomes, which conceals something still brighter behind. So, impenetrable forever. But this is how the lesser consciousness sees. What does that light see of itself? When the light knows itself, it is translucent in highest consciousness to its own spirit. The light knows itself entirely. And in the totality of that light, everything is known. And all that is yet beyond limitation is held in that totality of the light. It sees itself and knows its own mystery, fully revealed to it, unending, and yet held fully in its awareness. But to be able to fully enjoy itself, there has to be that station of a lesser light, which then can penetrate unendingly to enjoy this unending exploration of discovery. So it is as if it formulates a poise of itself as a lesser light to experience this unending journey, and that lesser light is the birth of the universe, of this manifestation, which then can enjoy the full discovery of himself. In other words, when he chooses to discover all that he is already and is known to himself, when he chooses to discover it as an exploration of a graded self-discovery, that choice and that path of his own self-discovery is the universe. In other words, each one of us is himself journeying within himself to experience himself in all possible ways of unending self-revelation, to enjoy that unfolding, unending self-discovery. And as we grow, it is he himself taking a poise in us, as us, who is discovering himself and growing to rediscover himself in identity, in union not identity, in union. And it is this which Mother refers to in one of her talks. She said the divine already knows himself entirely in identity. But there is a greater bliss. There is the bliss of his identity, I am all that is. But there is a greater bliss of union for which he must separate himself as if from himself, and that's the birth of the universe, and then approach him as a separate experience, eventually merging back into his totality. And there is then the bliss of union. And she says the bliss of union is far greater, richer than the bliss of identity, which is already there. And so it is this which is implied when he is describing these two statuses. To a lesser consciousness veiled in its own exceeding light and impenetrable forever, translucent in highest consciousness to its own spirit. It's the knowledge in identity, and then it is the knowledge in the approach through to union. But equally implied is the aspect of the bliss. So Sri Aurobindo stops here, but you can see how each of these facets could be taken up and within it dimensions discovered. Just as I took this example of the light, but light is one aspect, which is the aspect of knowledge. What about the aspect of sheer existence, aspect of sheer bliss, and within the bliss, innumerable facets of the bliss? And so one could actually discover within each of these descriptions a whole range of variations of these descriptions. What Sri Aurobindo has done is to capture in broad categories all the experiences one can have of the Absolute, and articulated these broad categories, within each of which you can have innumerable variations. And in a sense, one can say, if you look at the totality of beings in the evolutionary journey, it is the divine choosing through and in all these beings to explore all these facets of his self-discovery and enjoy them. Yes. Us, we, you and I. And that's why you have a unique line of exploration, as has each one of us. Yes. Yes. No. In the lesser consciousness, you have this experience of layers and layers of veiled light, revealing more and more as you approach, as you grow. The journey of your growth in time is already known in his revealed consciousness, where all is already present, revealed. To your consciousness, which is now bound in the experience of space-time, there is a sequence and an unfoldment and a struggle of the journey. But all the possibilities of your future journey are already held in the divine, in that station, translucent in highest consciousness to its own spirit. All that you're going to explore is already there. And yet, to be able to enjoy that as an exploration, that consciousness has to position itself as if in limitation, lesser light. Okay? Yes. Right now. In 1,000 years? Exactly. We experience this passage of greater and greater knowing as we proceed in our journey. All of which greater knowings that we will have are already known to that highest station. And in a sense, you may say that highest station is revealing to you part by part, layer by layer. And that is your journey, what he reveals to you. You're not really journeying. You're just experiencing greater revelations. Right? In a way, these are different ways of looking at the same truth. So your whole journey of the future is as if mapped out in his totality of consciousness, including all the possible variations that you might choose in your freedom. But right now, the experience of this enjoyment of discovering and being surprised and being fascinated, that's part of the experience. of the divine enjoying himself. Yes. You see, the transparency, if you look at in our human experience, transparency has the sense of everything being even and unable to conceal. Whereas here, the suggestion is by saying translucent, the suggestion is that it's all known, it's all seen, and yet there's the possibility of modulating, intensifying these layers against those layers and creating variations, which is the basis for this appearance of lesser light. So, how does a one who is all light create the appearance of lesser light? By concealing light by light. And so, this possibility exists in translucency. What is that? Okay. Yes, yes. Mother had described the Matrimandir crystal, and in the way she saw it in her vision, she said, the play of light. Now, if it is completely transparent, you don't have scope for the play of light. Anyway, maybe. Sorry. So, in this description, Sri Aurobindo has caught all the possible broad approaches of knowing self, knowing the absolute. But you see, there's a certain sequence in which one flows into the other, and you come back eventually to the first, where he said simply, it is the cosmic and supra-cosmic spirit, the supreme Lord, the supreme self. When you go in this way, you find one sliding into the other, one sliding into the other, and then pick any of them and from there slide into the other and slide into the other. You slide like this in experience, however limited to the human capacity, but something touched. You experience a certain continuity across all these facets of the experience or perception of the absolute. And at some point, as the consciousness ascends and the identity is more and more complete, the whole is held simply as one experience. These things are to the dimensional mind irreconcilable opposites, but to the constant vision and experience of the supramental truth consciousness, they are so simply and inevitably the intrinsic nature of each other that even to think of them as contraries is an unimaginable violence. So, this intrinsic nature of each other, you take any one of them and you'll find all these facets implied in them. So, that's why, as a meditation, one can dwell on each of them, and as one proceeds, you'll find from each, it's as if you can slide to any other. And they're just facets, aspects of each other. The image naturally coming is facets of the diamond, but even that is too limiting as an image. When we have already got to this point, we should not go back to that. That's already too constricting in space and form. We have already now, as we moved through these various images, a sense of continuity of the different aspects of each other. And it's best to hold this in whatever inarticulate level of awareness that we have, where it feels as a living experience. And as the ascent takes place, entering the constant vision and experience of the supramental truth consciousness, they are so simply and inevitably the intrinsic nature of each other that even to think of them as contraries is an unimaginable violence. The walls constructed by the measuring and separating intellect have disappeared, and the truth in its simplicity and beauty appears and reduces all to terms of its harmony and unity and light. There is only one absolute, and all these are just facets of that unity and that illumination of experience. Dimensions and distinctions remain, but as figures for use. Now, this part is important because this happens only in the supramental consciousness. If you were to go into some kind of a negation, everything would blur and fall into a indescribable, ineffable blank. But because it is the nature of the supramental consciousness, it includes everything. The dimensions and distinctions which mind or intellect had cast, they are there now, but as figures for use. I have a vocabulary, I have a way of distinguishing facets of experience, that's all. Not as a separative prison for the self forgetting spirit. The spirit, as it stands back, discards all these articulations of form. One can even say, loses itself in itself, self forgetting. And on the other extreme is the prison cast by intellect, by all these words and terms and philosophies, and everything is narrowed down, and spirit bound into prison. And between these two extremes, you have as if an opposition. But the supramental consciousness sees simply one experience and these as facets. As an analogy again, one could look at the world from outer space, see all these surfaces of water and land, and then you wonder, what are these lines we draw that we call national borders, countries, and distinctions? How silly. And yet, provisionally, you can in your mind conceive those lines, use them to describe different places, different cultures, and different administrative structures. But they don't bind you. They're just a way of distinguishing and separating for the purpose of articulation. In your experience, you see the whole continuity always as figures for use. No more the prison is there. And then the consciousness of the transcendent absolute, with its consequence in individual and universal, is the last, the eternal knowledge. So you have here the absolute in the individual, universal, and the transcendent. But in the transcendent absolute, with its consequences in individual and universal, the transcendent is the last, the eternal knowledge. So at that point, we have reached a stage where the individual and the universal are only facets and articulations of this transcendent absolute. How are we to describe it? No words, only this adbhutam, wonderful. And we stand before it stunned, or we experience in that identity something so overwhelmingly beautiful. Our minds may deal with it on various lines, may build upon it conflicting philosophies, may limit, modify, overstress, understress sides of the knowledge, deduce from it truth or error. But our intellectual variations and imperfect statements make no difference to the ultimate fact that if we push thought and experience to their end, this is the knowledge in which they terminate. So the thing is, we have to start with what we have, and it may be with some limiting and unbalanced formulation of philosophy, even partially erroneous. The key, though, is we have to push thought and experience to their end. And the two will complement, because at first we have to use our rational mind as the discriminator. So we push thought, we push experience parallelly. If we just go to thought, then we end up with this inability to be sure. The thought supports, it's the leader. Remember, the first scout, the experience follows. But when experience enters the space to which thought pointed, it gives you a greater truth. And now thought is quiet. Experience having had, now thought articulates, gives it a certain form, and points to something further, and experience follows and follows, until at some point the thought fades and it is pure experience leading to pure experience, greater and greater. So it doesn't matter where we start, because everything in the universe being a special limited articulation of that, you can start from anything. There is nothing which is a wrong starting point. Everything eventually, if you persisted, will lead you to that. And this is the only thing, this is the knowledge in which they all, without exception, terminate. The object of a yoga of spiritual knowledge can be nothing else than this eternal reality, this self, this Brahman, this transcendent that dwells over all and in all and is manifest yet concealed in the individual, manifest yet disguised in the universe. So, this is like a sentence which gives a summary of the whole thing. Object can be nothing else than this eternal reality, self, Brahman. Okay, so we have got three different facets. What's real? This divinity is the only real. This real is self. It is its own reality. It is the all, Brahman. This transcendent that dwells over all, there is a poise presiding over, and in all, immanent. And in this immanence, it takes two special focal points, the individual and the universe. So in the individual, it is manifest yet concealed. In the universe, it is manifest yet disguised. Now, he's very interesting, the subtle use of this distinction, concealed and disguised. Superficially, we'll say it's the same thing, but there's something important to see. In the individual, all that we are, well, finally, it's an expression of that, so it reveals that. But what does it really reveal? What it reveals is a form, and the form being opaque conceals what is within, leading the journey and struggling to reveal itself. So in the individual, we have this experience of a soul that is struggling to push forward, and a form that conceals what this soul is, and yet it represents it, and by representation it reveals in a limited way. In the universe, similarly, the whole universe being an expression of that, manifest in the universe, yet disguised in the universe. So in the universe, it is as if it has chosen to put on veils. It has chosen deliberately to put on veils, and the veils are meant to reveal different facets which are intended to deceive and so disguise. In the individual, we did not put on these veils with the intention of deceiving. We're struggling to get rid of the deception. It's just the material that we had to take from the universe being what it is, it conceals, it blocks us up. And we're struggling to purify. The intention in the individual is to manifest. The problem was the material we took was from that disguised substance of universe. And so we have caught elements of that disguise unintentionally. We took birth as conscious souls with the intention of manifesting ourselves, but because we had to take substance of the universe to take a physical form of birth, the substance we took bound us and limited us, not by our choice, but by compulsion. Therefore, in the individual, he says, that transcendent which dwells over all and in all is manifest yet concealed. But in the universe, manifest yet disguised, because it chose to put on all these variations for the purpose of the play of hide and seek. So the universe was cast as a backdrop, as a terrain in which the game can be played out. The individual was put out as a player in the terrain to play out the game. The intentions being different, there is this very subtle distinction of disguise and concealment. So just by using these two different words, immediately he is conveying so much in the image. And the journey then is seen as the divine manifesting in so many individuals in an environment perfectly designed for a game of hide and seek. Everything is set up to conceal. And then we struggle in the journey of the hide and seek, revealing, discovering not only each other, not only the nature of reality and the universe, but as we discover ourselves, we discover others more completely and we discover the universe more completely. and there is an increasingly more joyous self-discovery in a collective exploration. And all of this is part of the unfolding of the play, which we call the Leela. But the Leela is fully revealed only when we are conscious participants, where we know the nature of the play, and now we are enjoying the play by free choice. Right now, we are not yet in the stage where we can say we are participating in the Leela, except unconsciously. I don't know why I am here. I don't know who I am. I don't know why I took birth. I don't know why I have to go through this struggle of life and what is the whole point of all this. But I'm compelled by something deep within me that knows, which is concealed. To it, this whole life is a journey of Leela. To me, who I am on the surface, this is a whole domain and den of ignorance and struggle, pain, death. As that which enjoys the Leela emerges and reveals itself, I become a conscious participant of the Leela. So, the object of a yoga of spiritual knowledge can be nothing else than this eternal reality. And now we see it here, not somewhere up there. This reality, this self, this Brahman, this transcendent that dwells over and in all and is manifest yet concealed in the individual, manifest yet disguised in the universe. It's a very beautiful summary of this whole thing, and then we have the last two paragraphs, which we will take up next time, where he discusses that when we reach this culmination, it does not need to end in an extinction, and he explains why. Useful to understand, but already when we are looking at things in this way, we know we came here not for extinction, but for the play and for the manifestation of the bliss. You can take up any comments or questions. Mhm. Yes. Yes. Translucent does not exclude transparent, but it provides for a transparency which is variable by free choice. When he chooses to know himself entirely revealed, that is his transparency to himself. When he chooses to play in his awareness of himself, that is the play in the translucency, in which then there is possibility of gradations. And so there is a possibility of lesser light entering relation with the greater light and so on. When you meditate on this verse, okay, she is referring to a common prayer, which is a verse in Sanskrit that says Brahma is the Guru, Vishnu is the Guru, Mahesha is the Guru, the three aspects as a trinity of the creator, the sustainer, and the transformer or destroyer. And then it continues, Guru is the ultimate Brahman, Parabrahman, incarnate. To that Guru I bow down. Such is the verse. So the question is whether there is anything beyond that. The question I would ask rather is when you relate to that reality as Guru, what is it that you seek for when you approach the Guru? We approach Guru because Guru is meant to lead us, to remove the Guru. The word means remover of concealments, remover of ignorance. So we approach that Guru for removal of the veils which conceal, so that we may have the full revelation of the reality of the divine, isn't it? So if you look at this prayer, it is putting you in relation with the divine as the Guru, but then implied is the purpose. The Guru is meant to lead you now to your own self awareness, self awakening, and awakening of the whole revelation of the divine. That is what you have to look at beyond. Your role is not simply to say, I am the disciple, that is the Guru, and so I stop, I close my eyes, I go to sleep. The Guru is now going to help you to do something which then you have to do, you have to make an effort for, and then he leads you into it. So there is something greater that you have to look forward to in the relationship or through the relationship. Does that answer your question? Yes. Of course, when Guru appears, then Guru appears to help you now to experience what he can see. So Guru's appearance is only giving you a firm point of contact through which he can help you now to get to the experience which he is meant to lead you to. So then the journey begins where he holds you by the hand and takes you to the experience. Isn't it? Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Before the Guru, you have to aspire for all that the Guru can give you, or all that it is you are seeking for which you have approached the Guru. The problem, I may take a very mundane example here. So many people who came to the mother said, oh, I have found my Guru. Now my life is done. I don't have to do anything else. I have found my Guru. I offer my flower to the Guru every morning and I continue doing what I am doing. Then the whole point was lost. We had to open ourselves to the Guru, ask her to transform us, to help us to grow. But that effort itself of the Guru's help will be effective when you are making an effort from your part to participate in what the Guru is working within you. Right? So there was this, having found the Guru, now the journey actually begins. And then the journey is what is important. Otherwise, there was no point to have a Guru. Finding the Guru is not an end in itself, it is the beginning rather. And that's where people got stuck. So many got just stuck there. So they even took a very passive form. Oh, I have found my Guru, I have surrendered my life, I don't have to worry. Everything that happens will happen according to Mother's will. True, but not really true. True, because I am passive, now her will is to kick me awake. And so I have this huge burden of problems that now fall upon me. And I say, why is it Mother's will to punish me? Is she putting me through a test? And I burden myself, I bunker down and say, I have to survive the test. It worsens it, isn't it? Because I put myself in wrong relation with the Guru. Rather, the right relation was, now the Guru has to lead me, and I have to make the effort of following, and then you can at each step grow. And then her help will be not to burden you with problems to break your shell, but to open. And then you may have problems which appear as part of the opening process, things which resist. And then it's not a test, it's not a burden put upon you by her, rather, she's helping you to break through them. So the whole relationship changes with everything, with life and with the divine. And those are the people who have then made good use of their stay here. We had this question put to the mother. People asked, we've been here so many decades now, we don't feel anything much has changed. And she said, yes, you didn't make the effort. An opportunity is given, but then you have to begin the effort. So we are all fortunate. We have found the Guru, and then the real thing begins. What do you aspire for? And you can put a for articulation. You said whether to ask for supramental consciousness. Yes, you can ask for that. Or you can ask simply for her to transform you, to open yourself, to purify you. Whatever it is, you have a right to ask. And that helps to focus the attention of the immediate work that's going on within us. We can take a most general formulation and say, Thy will be done. I'm yours. I'm your child. I open myself entirely or as much as I'm capable of. And now you work in me and change me, transform me, do what you think has to be done, what you know necessary. One can take a poise like that. But what will happen even in such a poise, as the journey proceeds, there will be points of resistance and opposition where you say, where you can actually formulate and say, this is the problem I'm facing, help me to get over this. And of course, you make the effort at the same time to get over, and then she helps and works through your effort. And that's when we have the active sadhana. Then you can have this experience which Sri Kapali Shastri had. He said what he had achieved in 10 years of intense tapas elsewhere was achieved here easily in 6 months because of the active help of the Divine Mother. And such is the kind of acceleration that is possible, even for a man who had already attained to self realization and high spiritual experiences. Repeat. Can you repeat? How can you live? Always. How can you live always according to the mother's will? To begin with, you have to have a general perspective of life which is in tune with her will. And what is her will that you should do in your life? To grow, to evolve, to become more conscious, right? So there has to be a general orientation of the whole life. Otherwise, there will not be anything that you do which is according to her will. It's not that according to mother's will, should I pick up the flower with my left hand or with my right hand? Should I put it this way or that way? That has nothing to do with her will. Her will begins with the overall purpose of your soul's intention in this life. Okay, so there has to be, first of all, this general orientation. And then in each activity, a simple question you can ask is, what you feel mother would want you to do? Okay, it may start with a conception in your head, or it may start with a feeling of your heart, both of which may be partial, mixed, or even wrong. But you start with what you have. As you proceed, when you do something which is in attunement with the divine will, you will find there is a deep sense of satisfaction, something which is deeply happy when that right action is done, when that right effort is made. When it is contrary, and it will happen because we have often fixed ideas which confuse us, you will not feel that, or you will feel the opposite. You'll feel something is not okay. And then you have to introspect at that point and see where you went wrong. And sometimes you may have a fixed idea which you will feel each time I do this, it doesn't work. What is it that she would truly want? So there is a progress in your perception of what she would want. Until at some point a contact is actually established, you feel her presence, you feel her within you, around you, above you, whatever form it takes. And immediately that you have a choice, you feel what feels right in your relationship with her consciousness. And once that point is crossed, the rest of the journey can be easier. But still, what you'll find very often, you know what you should do, you know what is the right thing, but something resists, something opposes, some excuse pops up, you're too lazy, you're incapable, or you make an effort, you fail, etc. And that's part of the struggle. The point is not whether you succeed or fail. The point is whether you were moving in the right direction. And sometimes a big leap is difficult to make, but many small steps can be taken gradually over time. Once that conscious contact is there, that you feel at each moment this is right, you are in a safer track. Still, there will be times when you won't feel. You'll feel a dullness. You don't have the contact. The contact is as if completely gone. Then the principal mother said is you follow your current highest available understanding or deepest feeling, whatever it is. And you be sincere to yourself. Of course, there'll be all these masquerading feelings which will appear, self-deceptions. You know deep inside what's right, but you allow something else to come forward which feels comfortable and so on. And that's part of the whole process. But if you have made that conscious choice to be true to her and you try to be sincere, transparent to yourself, you'll eventually get over these things. A common rule, a general rule which I would recommend in this matter, especially dealing with self-deception, that you can accept provisionally that you can deceive anybody in the world, but you'll never deceive yourself. Because to deceive yourself is to lose your contact with the mother. So if ever you accept to do something which you know to be not the highest, and I won't use the word wrong, it's not the highest, it's not the best, it's not what you would want. You say to yourself, yes, I am making a conscious choice here. It's not the highest. I'm accepting something which is even wrong, but say it to yourself and say it to the mother. Mother, look, I'm choosing this which is wrong. Help me to get over this. I'm struggling with parts of myself. So if you keep that transparency, then you can get over those problems fairly rapidly. But if you hide to yourself, oh, this is just, and you justify it, you've created a layer not only which hides from yourself, but which cuts off from her light. And though she can see through you, she can't help you because you've cut yourself off from her. So you have to be naked, absolutely bare to her. To yourself also. It's sometimes painful, but you make the effort. To others, you can conceal, you can even cover up. That's fine, provisionally. But it's a whole cultivation of life in this way. And it's not for mother. She explained it's not what you do, whether I eat with the left hand or with right hand, whether I eat dal or I eat rice. These are not relevant. For her, what is relevant is the attitude with which I'm doing what I do. I don't know if translucent has that sense. Let me just check. So, so translucent as it is defined is permitting light to pass through but diffusing it so that persons, objects, etc. on the opposite side are not clearly visible. If you go to the origin of the word, it is to shine through. Lucere, to shine, and trans is through. Shine through. It does not have the sense of self-luminosity. Yes. But which has a diffusing effect. It's transparent, you see what's on the other side. Translucent has a diffusing effect. You don't see directly clearly what's on the other side. That is the translucency. You do see, it's more like a lens. Anyway, but for the context of the Matrimandir, I will not make any comment. That's it's more the distinctions of the term which I am pointing to. Mhm. I think we can close with this. We have, unfortunately, next Friday I will have to be out of station, and we'll continue this the Friday after. Sunday, though, I will be there. And for those who are interested, we have some videos of earlier sessions and other lectures now from different places, which may be of interest. The lectures which I recently did in Switzerland would be, I think we can use that if you like. We can use that. That will be of interest, I think. They were on various themes, but there are elements there which would be of general interest. Oh.